What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over attaching weapons to sockets. This will allow us to actually hold our weapon in a more manageable manner, I suppose. Now for the blaster that it starts out with, honestly the way they have it is good. I've just changed it to kind of show you the implementation of it, but that one can honestly be left alone. However, for the other weapons that we added, such as this thing I called the Kingslayer, which is just basically an assault rifle, it wasn't really in the right spot. And even now, it could definitely be adjusted a lot more to look better. But you can do all the adjusting very easily once you know how to do it. Most importantly, out of all these, is the blaster, which is our bruiser, which is our submachine gun, because this weapon was like not even in the player's hands. And now you can see it. This one looks pretty good. I've spent some more time in this one to make sure it looks good. But anyway, it's a pretty simple episode. There's not a lot to it. The actual implementation is pretty simple, but it's really important. Let's get started today. There's not a lot of logic that we need to add. I'm just going to cover it pretty much as in-depth as I feel is necessary, and then we're going to go over some of the uses of it and some of the reasons why this is very important, other than just looking good to attach and looking better than obviously just hanging out there in the open, you know, not attached to our character's hand. So let me show you what we're doing. So I go to my first-person character. Now, first-person character is actually the blueprint version of the character that the template automatically puts in for you. So when you look at class settings, it is a child of our code class, just for the record. I know we've used this one before, but it's important to point that out. And you remember, it's got all this stuff going on, but don't get confused. Essentially what it is this is us. This is what we look like, because this is mesh one player. And what that really means is this is the mesh that the player will see. Now, there is another mesh, which I've added something to, and we will go over at the end, and that's what our character can actually look like to everybody else. Or can look like to us, depending on what we want. You don't always just want these arms. So we'll be covering that too. That's for another episode. I just point that out now because specifically we're going to be working with mesh one player when we do our attach points here. So this is an inherited component. It's actually created in our code class, and it's considered visible and read-only. We can't actually edit it within the blueprint. Or in fact, I think you can, but it'll give you a warning if you try and use it. So let's go into the code, and then before we do anything else, at this point we're going to be using some of the stuff we've worked on in other episodes of the series. So I think we're about 14 episodes in. If you're interested in catching up in the series and making your own first-person shooter game, then feel free to click on this icon in the top right corner right now to take you back to the very first episode. Okay, and if you don't want to do that, or you've already seen it, that's perfectly fine. Just know that we are going to be using some of the components that we did create ourselves in this tutorial series, and also we are going to be using the switch weapon mesh function that we created in this episode. I'll link that video as well in this iCard, because that one you'll have to watch or you'll have to have your own logic for. Either way is fine. Now, go ahead and go into your FPS Tutorial Character. So this is your base character for your game. Make sure you go to Mesh 1P. Remember, that's the first person view. I mean, it says it in the comment here as well. Arms, seen only by self. Now when you have this, just make sure you change it. It's visible defaults only here, I believe, is what they put it to. There's a few things. It might be visible anywhere and blueprint read only. Regardless of what it is prior, make sure it is now blueprint read right, so we can actually use it and set it. And the category can remain mesh. That is fine. You don't have to actually change anything with the object itself, so that's good. And then go ahead and build solution, as we always do. Once it succeeds, go ahead and compile in Unreal. Okay, and then now we should be able to drag this onto the screen, compile, and it won't give us any warnings or errors. That's what we want. And the logic here is actually really simple. If you've been watching the series, then all we've done here is in the event switch weapon mesh, which is where we were changing the weapon that we were actually seeing, along with the projectile class that we were spawning. We are now also attaching that weapon to the correct socket for the character. So we don't have any sockets in place. In fact, there's actually a grip point socket on the arms by default. Feel free to use that. I did not use it. I made my own because I figured you may want different sockets and it would be easier for me to show you. But if you know about sockets, then feel free to use this for what we're going to do today. What I've done is I've gone to the area that I've wanted the weapon to attach to. Now, you know, the weapon will have multiple attach points and things like that, so you may have to fiddle with the actual model, where it's going to spawn and where it's going to be positioned. You may have to offset it. You can also just change actually the socket location after you create it to kind of do a manual offset. Just be careful with that, because if you have a bunch of different skeletons, you're going to want to have the sockets in the same places. So you'll probably want to use the exact same skeleton and just change the mesh if you're going to do it that way, which should be perfectly fine unless you have different playable characters that their skeletons just wouldn't work together for various reasons. Alright, so we're going to attach it to our left hand. That's just what I've decided is good based on his animation, because you can see in his hand he actually has his left hand out holding it while the other hand is on the trigger. So that makes the most sense to me to put the left hand where we're putting the socket. But again, you'll have to play with it yourself to make it look the way you want it to look. And of course, we'll add animations later to the actual weapons, because the weapons are skeletal meshes, so we'll be able to do reloading and some extra stuff with sprinting and things like that to make it look even better. Alright, so once you're on the bone you want, just right click and you can hit add socket right here. And it will create a socket, pretty simple. It'll usually call it the name of the bone with socket after. So I've just gone ahead and changed the bone name to the weapon that I plan on placing there. I have different sockets for each weapon, but it's definitely not required. Just some weapons do look better with certain positions set up, and you can either do an offset on the socket you're attaching to or just have different sockets. To my knowledge, there's no real downside to having multiple sockets, so I usually go that route when I'm doing a game or logic where multiple things can be attached, but that's up to you. So I've got my sockets here, and what I'm going to do now is pretty simple, but basically I'm actually just going to look and see if it looks like it's in a good spot. You can actually see I've changed the pistol and AR sockets from where the SMG is. And that's really just because they're longer weapons than the SMG, so this one looked better here. But you can actually move the socket the whole way around. You can rotate it and everything. So you can see this is off the left hand, but it is moved quite far away. You can go up here and click select and translate objects, or just press W. And then you can go ahead and move this. See? And then if I were to save this, and I think that was for what, my AR? Now you can see it's all the way up here. I got a turret. Like a shoulder-mounted turret, right? And it's that simple. You can change what it's attaching to. Now, when we actually attach it, we'll lock some things like rotation and location to make things look better. But it's really that simple in terms of creating them and having them go where you want them to. Okay? So easy enough, not bad. The other important thing here is you can actually preview your meshes on the socket, or really just on the area, any area you want. So any bone, any socket in this skeleton tree hierarchy here. All you do is right click on what you want, in my case the socket, and I can add a preview asset of like the SMG, for example. And you can see it does a good job. It's like, oh yeah, that's going to be right in his hand. Now if I was being really particular, then I might say, okay, it's cutting his hand out a bit. So what I want to do, perhaps, is, and it's a little finicky, not finicky, but it's just kind of hard to move sometimes. There you go. So that's a little bit better. It's not really cutting off his hand. Then I can be like, okay, we're good to do that. And then now if we pick it up, it should look a little bit different, but honestly, it should look better, and I think it does, just because we were using that to preview. So this is what you can do to make it look, you know, more advanced. The only thing is, it is through his hand at the moment. I think the actual placement is a little bit better. So you're going to have to play around with it, perhaps even rotate it, figure it out. But the important part here is that you know how to attach it. Because at the end of the day, you're probably not going to be using these actual arms on your character. You'll probably have a full mesh. I mean, just think about it. If you were just arms, then you wouldn't be able to see your legs, you wouldn't be able to see your reflection, and a lot of games do that, and that's actually okay. It does save on performance when not necessary. However, say you're making a multiplayer game. They need to be able to see something, and it's okay if we give them, like, their own mesh. So, think about it this way. If you played Apex Legends or some sort of game like that, now, you only ever see your arms when you're normally playing. There's a few actions that kind of make it third person or give you a different camera view. But obviously, you're not just arms. The enemies can see something. They can see, you know, your character, your weapon, all that. On top of that, though, there are things that you can do as the player that other characters cannot see. For example, if you inspect your weapon or item that you have, then the enemies and even your teammates, other players, cannot see you doing that. That's important because that determines, you know, what other players can see determines how we have to set a few things up. So the important part isn't necessarily, oh, this is not looking completely correct. This will need to be adjusted later. The important part is being able to add this stuff and get it into position now so that we can test what we want other players to see and what we don't want them to see, what we want to keep on the performance side, you know, keep low profile on the performance side. And you can go ahead and add as many as you want. You can actually add them all. You can simply right-click on the thing that the preview mesh is attached to and remove all attached assets, and you will get rid of it. And then I could go in and add my assault rifle. I forget which one it was that I actually used. But you can see this one came in a little funky. So we can go ahead and rotate them. Whoops, that's actually, I'm rotating them the wrong way, but there you go. I mean, you can get the picture here. I'm not going to sit here and spend a ton of time trying to figure out how this looks and getting it perfect. But something like that. I mean, not really, because his hand is over. There we go. Probably something like that. It just has a general estimate of like, oh yeah, that's kind of where it should be. But there you go. So that's how you can actually play with those and get them into the spot you want. Now, the only actual other logic we have to do today is change our gun to be attached to that specific point when we switch to it. And also just, I'm doing a little, technically a hack here, but just because we don't have a system set up yet, where we can switch to the weapon mesh by default. That way we're not seeing the first-person gun, the regular blaster, without switching to the component at the start. It just looks a little ugly to kind of do that fast swap of like, okay, here's the one view of the blaster, here's the next view of the blaster. It just looks choppy. So, where we were doing our switch weapon mesh and we were switching our gun and our projectile class, like I mentioned earlier, what we need to do is attach our gun to our mesh component. Now, specifically in this case, we're going to be using our mesh 1P. Drag your mesh 1P into the scene, and then drag your FP gun into the blueprint here. You can do it a few ways. The easiest way, I think, to get the right attached to component is drag off your FP gun, attach to component, and you don't want the target to be the actor. So you can see I messed it up there. Whoops, I didn't mean to press it that time. I messed it up there, but I'm going to leave it in so you can see my struggle with it. We basically want the target to be the scene component. Doesn't really matter which one you drag off of, just make sure the FP gun is now the target and the mesh 1P is the parent, because we're going to grab the socket on the parent to attach the target to. And now all we have to do is put in our socket names, which, by the way, I think I forgot to mention it, but just right click and rename socket if you want to rename these things. So for me, like SMG socket, oops, just like that. Okay. And I do that for all of these. I do pistol socket, AR socket, and SMG socket. Now my rules, I keep location rule relative, rotation rule world, and scale rule relative. The thing is, the rotation rule, I'm keeping world because if I don't, then it will be relative based on where it was at, which you can see they're all not really where we want them to be. That's actually very fixable. But the reason I'm not doing that for now is because we're going to be going over animations, such as when we're running and things like that, and actually making this work, making the gun look good with it. And since we're going to be doing that, we're actually going to have to basically change the rules that we're setting up now anyway. The logic will stay the same, but these actual rules within the attach components will change. So for now, I'm just keeping everything world, because quite frankly, it's not really beneficial to us to be changing them now, if we're going to have to change them again later. So no worries there. And then every time I switch between the weapons, they should be correct. In the correct spot. Correct orientation and all. Alright. And then the quick little hack I was telling you about, so you don't have to, you know, kind of skip between bruiser to now the attached to socket bruiser. You could just call the logic in begin play, but what I prefer doing is adding a delay and then calling the switch weapon mesh, just in case you want your character to start with a different weapon other than the bruiser. You can pass it in an index. You could even get your weapons array index and do that. The reason I kind of bring all these things up is I've been asked by 2 people now to kind of make the actual first-person shooter tutorial, or the template that Unreal gives, a little bit better. And not that it's bad, because it actually does a lot of stuff right, but it has everything kind of open-ended. And, you know, you don't want all of that for one game. If you have all that, it's actually going to come out, you're going to have a lot of extra stuff. So I try and open it up so you can see whatever you need to with it, and mess with whatever you need to with it. So don't get confused. If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to go over it. I do have a reason for doing everything that I'm doing and breaking it up in these chunks. So don't worry. We have a plan. I think we're getting to a more optimized, more, you know, easier to use even template for the first-person shooter game. One more thing for the record. This function, I don't know if this was blueprint callable originally. I did do some tests off video, and I may have added this. So switch weapon mesh is our event here, and it's definitely a blueprint implementable event in our Fps Tutorial Character. I'll scroll down to it. Switch weapon mesh right here. You can see it's blueprint callable and blueprint implementable. So in case that's not how yours is set up, and I'm pretty sure it actually is not, then go ahead and add that. Make sure it looks like this, because even if it's blueprint implementable, you won't be able to call it within blueprint. This just means it's an event that you can define the logic for in blueprint. So you have to specify blueprint callable. Okay. So, yeah, that's about it for today's episode. I do want to show you a few other things. So, I've made the mesh invisible, but you can go ahead and put an actual mesh in your mesh component here for the future. We're going to be working with this very soon. This is our whole body as opposed to just our arms. I'm using the YBot mesh from Mixamo, which I have a video on importing Mixamo models if you're interested. In the next episode, we'll probably be going over animations, and for zooming in, because we need to bring the weapon to us. For sprinting, because, you know, if we sprint, we probably want our gun to be running back and forth, not staying directly in the center of our screen. Alright guys, well thank you so much for watching. If this video helped you, and helped make you your first-person shooter that you may be interested in making, then please subscribe. It does more for the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for the love and the help that you've been giving this channel and all of my series throughout the last year and a half. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you guys. If you had any issues with this episode or any of the episodes or series that I have up, feel free to reach out to us on Discord. There's a link in the description. You can click it and join it. And then we'll be happy to help you with any of the issues that you had, or any questions you have. Lastly, guys, if you want to come check me out on Twitch, I've started doing programming live streams. So we're still doing Dark Souls games on Wednesday, but now every Friday is going to be a programming stream. I will most likely be doing a programming stream on Friday on YouTube this Friday, and perhaps every alternating Friday. But if you'd like to come support me on Twitch, just give me a little bit of love there. Twitch.tv/Shawnthebro27. Feel free to go check it out and check out the first ever programming live stream that we did last week. It was a ton of fun, and we're working on a side-scroller game, kind of like Super Mario Brothers, where you have to actually jump on people to defeat them. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.